Welcome to Life Unrestricted.
This is your show if you're sick of living a life controlled by food and exercise rules, and if you're ready to learn how to accept yourself and enjoy the heck out of life. My gig is about body image, femininity, self-worth, and resilience. Come on, let's walk side by side as we slowly step out of restriction misery and unlock our true selves.
Your host, Merritt Boxler, is a former national radio DJ, freelance journalist, speaker, and writer with a passion to make women feel good in their bodies. This is a show brought to you live from Switzerland.
Hey, lovely radicals. Merritt here, but not really here. Before we get to today's interview, you will hear a generic announcement that will stay the same for the next few months, so bear with me. As most of you already know, I am currently offline for the next few months, as I have made the very hard decision to go to residential treatment for the first time at the age of 44. I don't know how long I will be gone, maybe 3, maybe 6 months, so who knows. All I know for sure is that the facility I'm going to is very, very strict with internet access and generally what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. And it was asked of me to really focus on my own healing and not continue, doing interviews and working on the podcast all the time. So there's that. And as uncomfortable as this is for me, it makes complete sense, of course. Yet, since I have quite a backlog of already recorded conversations that I wouldn't want for you to miss out on, since my guests were such gems and you really just need to hear what they had to say, I had to find a way to bring them to you while I'm away. My decision was to record all the intros beforehand and get everything ready before I go so that I can post them whenever I can. We will see how it works. And because I don't know how often I will be able to check in on Facebook, in our community or other social media, I have decided to let a group of great people take over for the next months ahead. So please don't expect me to post or comment as much as I did. I know I will be online only very infrequently, and I won't be able to respond to emails or messages. Just know that our community on Facebook called Life Unrestricted is in the hands of wonderful experts and generally great, kind people who know about recovery and who are there for you. So rest assured that the space will be as safe as it's always been. And who knows, just when you least expect it, I might be able to pop in and say hi every now and then. As I said, who knows? That's probably the phrase I use most frequently these days. Who knows? Who knows? I really don't know anything. So for now, all I do know is that I want to bring you all the episodes that I have already recorded. And once I run out, well, who knows? We will see about that when the time comes. As for all of you lovely Patreon supporters who are still willing to contribute to this show on patreon.com/lifeunrestricted, know that you are always in my heart and that I'm eternally grateful for your support. As I cannot give any actual shout outs to the latest contributors anymore because these intros are pre-recorded, I just wanted you all to know that I love your support and that I'm super happy to have you. And for those of you who are interested, as I said, the link to my support platform is patreon.com/lifeunrestricted. Every pledge you are making is happening on a no strings attached basis, so you can cancel anytime. Thank you, all of you, for being you. And now, showtime. If my pre-calculations from before I went away to treatment were correct, today's episode should be the first one of 2018. So here's me back in October 2017 doing a weird little time travel thing and now wishing you a wonderful start into 2018. Happy New Year, lovely radicals. May you be as kind to yourself as humanly possible. That's what I truly wish for you. May you see your innate worthiness and your badassness more than ever before. In today's episode, you will hear my conversation with Uhrich from Pennsylvania. Lou and I spoke a few months back, and she shares some great knowledge with us today. Lou is a certified eating psychology coach, body image mentor, and life coach who helps women worldwide to grow in self-awareness, find food freedom, and practice body love. She also hosts the Untamed podcast, where she interviews women who are living beyond limits and helping others to do the same. Lou specializes in guiding her clients to overcome struggles with yo-yo dieting, food restriction, binge eating, loss of periods, shame, body hate, and other unwanted symptoms, mindsets, or behaviors. Through her one-on-one coaching program and online courses, she teaches participants to end the exhausting hustle for food and body perfection by finding out who they really are, what they truly want, and how to finally get it. As I said, this conversation took place a few months ago, and I remember the first thing I asked of Lou was to tell us about her highly unusual upbringing, considering the diet culture messages most people grow up with, and if she could share some of her memories of how she felt in her body as a child.
I grew up feeling really good in my body. So my earliest memories of my body were ones of connection and understanding. My parents wouldn't have known the term, but they were most certainly very body positive. They never would criticize the way that I looked or my siblings looked. My mom, I have two moms. I have a birth mom and a stepmom, and they're both amazing women and amazing role models in my life, but neither one of them ever really mentioned much about bodies or dieting or you should eat that and you shouldn't eat that or you should do this and you shouldn't do that. They were just very accepting and, what do I want to say, encouraging. They were celebrating of all parts of me and who I was, my body being part of that, but also my mind and my talents and my abilities. And so I grew up really accepting my body, feeling at home and at peace in it because I didn't know anything else. And if my parents struggled with body image, they did so very privately. I saw them eating a wide variety of foods. I didn't see diet foods in the house. We didn't drink diet soda. If there was Coke around, it was regular. I didn't see a lot of faux foods or restrictive eating tendencies. And there was a range of all the things, of all the movements, of all the exercises. And so I was really able to just exist and be in my body and find out what I liked and what my body liked in a way, again, that wasn't encouraged verbally. It wasn't this thought out process that my parents were putting us through. As you know, they weren't parenting us into body positivity deliberately or intentionally. It just was the way that it was. And so I learned pretty early on that I loved dance, and I became a dancer. And I guess in high school, then I realized, oh gosh, I love to run too. And I became a sprinter. And it was all just interests I had. And my parents said, sure, go for it. If you like it, we'll support you. And when it came to food, same thing. Sure, go for it. You want to be a vegetarian for 2 years in high school? By all means, we'll order your hamburgers at McDonald's without the meat, even though we're totally embarrassed to go through the drive-thru and say it, or, oh, all you want to eat today is chocolate and cheese? That's fine. I'm sure tomorrow you might want something different. Like, they never pressured.
Incredible.
And it really was incredible. And I'm so thankful to have those examples because I have 3 children. And now I know what it's like to be raised in a very free eating, free moving environment because that's my memories, that's my recollection. And so my kids can have that same experience too. That's something that comes really easy to me because I had experienced it myself. And so, so that was like really my childhood, was being comfortable with my body, being comfortable with food. I was always bigger than all of my friends. I am still very close to this day to my best friend that I met in 6th grade. And she's still probably, 2/3 my body weight. Like she's much smaller than me. I was always much bigger, taller, and more muscular than a lot of other people in my life, a lot of my peers. But it didn't mean anything to me except for that it was. okay, my body's different than hers or his or whoever's, but it didn't really say anything about my worth. And it wasn't until later in my life that I ended up having a more tumultuous relationship with my body and with food.
Hold on, but in the meantime, did you not pick up any messages, from culture and the magazines or the ads and stuff? Were you completely unscathed by all that?
I have to say, this is really ironic. I've never told anyone this part of my story, but if you were to walk into my childhood bedroom, my teen bedroom, you could not see any of the wall. There was no paint visible. Mm-hmm. What was visible was magazine pictures of all different types of people. So I would go through magazines at doctor's offices, at our home, after my parents had gone through them. I would get all of the teen magazine and things like that. And I would create these collages of humans, of people. And I was very intentional about having all different kinds of people with all different styles and all different body sizes and all different genders. So I had the whole spectrum of people plastered on my wall. It was one big collage. You couldn't see it. And I was surrounded by it constantly. And never once did I look and go, oh, I want to look like her. Or, oh, I wish I had biceps like him. I never looked at these pictures longingly. I just loved being surrounded by the diversity of all these different images that I found in a range of magazines. So I was just excited, like a close-up of a person's eye or a really neat hairstyle, something, just a picture from the knees down and their bare feet on the beach or something. It was very intriguing to me. And so I did notice other bodies. I was definitely taking in a lot of the culture in terms of media and marketing, but it was kind of just like bouncing off. I could take it in and I could move on from it. I will say, again, a lot of props to my parents. My mom was a school teacher, and she would show me videos that she also shared with her students about the false messages in advertising and about how fake even commercials were, where the milk only looked so good because it was actually glue mixed with water to make it look thicker when that spoon dipped into the cereal bowl. Mm-hmm. Or, the cars really didn't go that fast, or the people really didn't look like that. I would watch documentaries on this when I was a kid because it was something that my mom was showing to her students. And something that she often said that I think really stuck with me is it takes every kind of people to make the world go round. And that was something that she would tell me all the time. If I got frustrated with a friend, if I, in my curious childhood age, would look at someone and go, oh my goodness, what are they wearing? Or why doesn't he have shoes on? Or she'd be like, hey, it takes every kind of people to make the world go round. And I would accept that and receive that. And so I do think that while I was receiving those messages from the culture and from media and marketing, I was also receiving messages from my parents and from people close to me to see everyone and to be more accepting. And that's not to say that I don't still have biases, that I don't still, we could never say that we're beyond, I don't think. It's something we have to continue to work towards. But I do think I had a really great leg up because of the sort of parenting that I had.
Yeah, it sounds like. And I can't help but think that this is a really important piece of the puzzle that a lot of people are lacking, because already they didn't feel self-confident, or they didn't feel, cherished enough or loved for who they are, or they had dieting parents, or there was body shaming all around. So I suppose it was a good thing that you had this solid foundation to fall back on. Yet you were not the unicorn. You were thrown off track at one stage in your life. Can you describe that part of your life?
Sure. Even someone who may not have the experience that I then ended up having later in life, probably somewhere along the line is still taking in, and it's still at one point or another is facing those body judgments, the food moralization, diet culture just brings to the forefront. They might not know it by that name. They might not call it a diet. They might not call it poor body image, but I don't know that there's any unicorns, really. Mm-hmm. I certainly, even given the great start that I had, was not one. No. And that's something else I've never shared in any of the other podcast interviews I've done, or even in my own story with my own audience, is that I think part of, and this could be a little controversial to some, I don't know, but part of what started to chip away at the foundation I had always had about myself was indoctrination by a faith community, a church that believed that women were subservient to men, that very much upheld the patriarchy. And I started getting these messages of like, well, if you don't want your future husband to watch porn, then you should definitely make sure that you are sexy.
Oh,
well,
man, yeah.
Well, if you want to please your husband, you need to make sure you're having sex at least every 72 hours.
I got that without religious ideas attached to it anyway. That's another thing that is deeply ingrained in a lot of female psyches. Like, we have to keep this man satisfied or else we shouldn't be surprised if he walks away. And nowadays I'm thinking, it's not my fucking responsibility to keep his, I don't know, testosterone balance in check.
Right. You know what? At the end of the day, if we have to strive to make somebody not walk away from us, they're not really there for the real us anyway. So walk. Like, that's my personal opinion now. But at the time growing up, certainly I started getting more into this religious culture that would also begin to judge the way that girls or women dressed, right? It was always a female's responsibility. If you weren't modest enough, of course, you could lead a man to catcall you, to touch you, to say something inappropriate, or to be compulsed to do something to you, or to, again, turn to porn or something like that. And so it was this subtle message that I was responsible for the way that everybody else acted and reacted towards my body. And it wasn't a message that I had at home. My parents were like, they were fine with the style that we had. My sister and I always joke that our parents were probably like, gosh, our girls are just slobs, because at one point we only ever wore baggy jeans, big T-shirts, and with like band names on them or crazy designs. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, this was us as teens. And I'm like, our parents were probably like, our girls are slobs. Like, this is it. But they never said anything. They let us dress the way that we wanted to. And it's not to say that anybody who dresses like that is a slob, because for the most part, I basically wear jeans and T-shirts all the time. But in terms of the teaching that I was getting outside of the home about how my dress and the way that I carried my body, and suddenly my body wasn't my own. That's what I started to hear. So that certainly began to seep into my understanding as I grew up and continued to be active in that community. I did certainly take on those beliefs that I was to blame for other people's judgments, actions, or inactions towards my body, and that I was responsible not only for that, but for men's behavior as well. And so that certainly was something that played into how I viewed myself, but it was kind of undercover for a while. And then what happened was a series of medical trauma for my family, not myself personally, but I have one daughter who was born with a genetic condition. So she has many complications of not having enough chromosomal material. And so she has something called Wolff-Hirschhorn syndrome, and she had lots of complications, seizures, physical delays, mental delays. And so that, coupled with the fact that then a few years later, my husband was hospitalized and the doctors discovered a mass on his pancreas that was looking like cancer. It was encroaching on other organs, and we were down at this clinic at Johns Hopkins all the time trying to figure out what was going on with him. And in the end, it ended up being an autoimmune condition that mimics cancer. It creates growths that mimic cancer, and his really did. Like, usually they can tell, but for a series of reasons, it went undetermined what it was for 5 different biopsies. And finally, they figured out that it was not indeed cancerous. But there was certainly a time, we had 2 young children at the time, and I thought for sure I'm going to be a widow with 2 young children, one of them having extreme needs. And that certainly created an environment. Right. That created an environment where I wanted anything to be able to control, because my life felt so out of control. And that, I will say, is certainly something that I can identify with my clients, with your listeners, with most everyone, is, yes, my realization that life was out of my control and not my own happened, later. It happened when I was an adult. And yes, I was subtly getting those messages along the way. But whether it's your parents telling you that your body's not good enough, that you shouldn't be eating that, whether it's somebody shaming you as a child, or whether it's a life event that pulls the rug out from under you and says, hey, guess what? Life's out of your control. That was the message I really got. And so, of course, I definitely bounced back and was like, I'm going to control something. And at just that time, an exercise program came up that the doctors were suggesting maybe my husband should do something like that for his health, which now I I would so have argued had I known then what I know now about health, about movement and food, dieting and exercise in extreme ways in order to quote unquote heal someone, when really it's so much more detrimental and physiologically stressful. So I always censor this, but it's a very popular, common program that a lot of people do, and someone suggested that we do it. And the doctors were like, oh, this will help with his blood pressure and, things like that. And so we both did it together, but I am the person who became obsessed with it.
What happened?
I took it to the nth degree. So there was a meal plan with it, and I followed it to a T. And I would compensate for anything that I ate beyond the meal plan, or if I had a glass of wine with friends, I would compensate through exercise, in addition to the exercise that was a part of this program. And I had a chart that I'd print out every single week with little boxes for what I could eat, and I would check them off. And if the boxes were checked, I was done. And I became meticulous about this chart, about the serving sizes of certain types of food, macronutrients, micronutrients, and about my movement, to the point where at first, of course, the endorphins kick in. Like I tell all my clients, dieting and exercise programs, weight loss related dieting and exercise programs are super easy at first because an expert gives you everything you have to do, and someone outside of yourself is telling you how to live, how to move, how to be. And so it's really easy at first, and I found it really easy, and the endorphins were going, and I felt absolutely excited about it.
And in control and on top of things.
Yes, There was something I could master. There was something I could predict. There was something that at the time, because this was the first ever experience I'd had with a diet or movement, so there was something that I could go, okay, if I just do X, then Y will happen. Because at first, that's what happens with the diet. At first, yes. But that's before your body gets smarter than the diet. That's before your body fights for your survival. And I didn't know any of this. So at first I'm like, yes, this is working. Finally, something in my life that's predictable and I can master and I can be thinking about, that can be taking up my time and my energy from these other things that really require grieving and compassion and honesty that I don't want to face. I wasn't facing any of that because I was obsessing, constantly thinking about food and exercise.
I so understand it. And it's great that you talked about this initial high, because whenever we try something new and it works in the beginning, then we become those evangelists and believers, and whatever it is, might be Atkins or might be paleo, whatever we do. Even if someone starts dieting by, doing a hot dog diet or whatever they do, even that works. So, but it doesn't work long term. But then we get quite desperate and think, why is it not working anymore? And we blame ourselves for, failing at the diet. And we try and do stuff harder because apparently we're not doing this hard enough. And we go Googling stuff and we find YouTube videos, and then we can lose ourselves so easily. And I'm talking nowadays. And when I was getting down all those rabbit holes, at least there was no Instagram, there were no YouTube channels with disordered eating advice givers and stuff like that. So I'm glad you pointed that out. And also the feeling of, pride and being on top of things and feeling slightly superior, like, hey, I'm getting this. That's a hard one to admit, but for a long time I felt like, I don't know what you guys are going on about, I should lose weight. Why don't you just do it? Because I was succeeding at it, but I had no idea what was waiting for me. No idea, really. I didn't.
Yeah, it's really, like I said, I always tell my clients, dieting is really easy at first, and it gets harder as you go because your body is smart and wants to protect you. And this intuitive eating, living on your own terms, eating, moving, being, existing on your own terms is really hard at first and gets easier over time because it's a complete opposite mindset, right? Like no one's telling you what to do. There's not boxes to check. There's not specific workouts you do and foods you eat and don't eat. There's not rules. Instead, you are being perceptive and observant and growing in relationship with yourself, with your body, and your very being, your passions, the way you view the world, the way you want to show up in the world. And that's what dictates when you're in a healthy relationship with your body, with food, and with life. That's what ends up dictating how you go about your days. And that's harder at first because it requires more intuition and more perception than we're used to having for ourselves.
And it takes taking agency back, not giving anyone else the power to give us rules and instructions, but to know ourselves, what we need to do and what our bodies need. And I'm in so many groups, for people who are recovering from hypothalamic amenorrhea, loss of periods, and you have no idea how much comparison there is going on and how much do you eat and can you display a full day of eating and, oh, you're eating more than me and I'm at a BMI of XYZ, then I shouldn't be gaining more weight. This is horrible. Or a woman today writing, I just got my period back. Now I really want to lose the weight again. It's horrible. I hate myself. And people were giving her advice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People were giving her advice. So sometimes I feel like a totally tired warrior. Like, how can we, get us all back into being ourselves and listening to our own bodies? It seems like it's getting harder and harder with all those contradictory voices out there in the social media world. But I would love for you to talk about your experience with hypothalamic amenorrhea, how you got into it.
Oh, sure. So I shared with you and the listeners my experience with what really led to disordered eating. And that would be a long experience where I, like you said earlier in the conversation, you kind of double down. Like once it stops working as well as it did, once A plus B stops equaling C, then you start eating even less and exercising even more and taking even more drastic measures. And that was certainly my story. And during that time, I also lost my period, which was crazy to me because I got my period when I was 11 years old and had never missed a month except for being pregnant in all of that time. Like I literally had never had, if I wanted to go and take a jog, I took a jog. If I wanted to lift a weight, I lifted a weight. If I wanted to eat a whole pie for dinner, or if I wanted to eat a salad, that's what I had done previously. And so this was such a drastic change, this regimented, rule-based, very structured eating and moving, that I think it didn't take my body long at all to be like, hold up, we're in danger. And so yes, very quickly, my body did not want to expend the energy that it takes to not only do the process of having a period, but prepping for life. And so, yeah, I didn't get a period after 2 months, and it took over 2 years for me to get my period back. And then it took even longer for it to be regulated back to the place it is now, where it's so predictable. Every full moon, I get my period.
Wonderful. What a lot of women don't realize, is, as I wouldn't have, I only know that for 8 years I've not had a period because that was the time when I went off birth control. But what I don't know is maybe it was missing even before that because I was restricting back then for a long time already and also over-exercising. So I don't really even know. And a lot of women don't know that when they're having a period on the pill, that's not really a period. And also often I hear, why is it so bad not to have a period? Because periods are inconvenient. And certainly that's what I thought. I didn't even mind. I just thought, I don't want to have children, so I'm kind of happy with this not happening. And I had no idea that all of the issues that started happening and accumulating were related to that. So please get into that.
Oh, sure. Yes, because this is something that I work on with clients so often is hypothalamic amenorrhea and getting their periods back. And I'm glad that you brought up your frustration with being in some of these groups when people are advising each other or expecting what worked for one person to work for another person when it comes to healing your hormonal function and resuming a period, because it doesn't. This is not one size fits all. The advice that I give my clients it's very broad and far-reaching because, once again, this is an intuitive process. This is a getting to know your body process. This is something that is so individual, so bio-individual, and also just mentally individual because stress certainly plays a role in our hormone function. And so if we're stressing out about getting our periods back, chances are it's going to take even longer to get our periods back because stress changes our physiology and changes our hormone function within our bodies. And so there's certainly not one size fits all. I have had the joy now of having multiple clients get their periods back, but all of the timing was very different. Some of them got it back when we were first started working together and moving through this process, and others it was 6 months, a year, but they were continuing to employ some of the things that we talked about. But yeah, so many physiological side effects can happen from missing a period. First of all, it's a sign that our body has enough energy to function normally. So it is a sign that our body has enough energy within itself from taking in food versus what it's expending in a day to actually do normal body functions. But those hormones that are involved with a period are also involved with so many other processes in our body. And so when we're missing our period, it's not just we're missing the bleeding once a month and the cramps. We are missing the hormones that are at play everywhere in these spaces in our bodies that are so important for bone health, for normal mental acuity and function, heart health. Again, hormonal health and function affects so many things. And so I know for myself personally, at first I was like you, I was like, oh, we're done having kids. And so I was like, yeah, no big deal. I lost my period. That's fine because who needs one anyway? But surely about, I would say, a year into not having a period and realizing that I was having night sweats, I was having joint pain, I was super moody, I had completely lost my libido. I realized all of those things were effects of not having. They weren't side effects of not having a period. Not having a period is another side effect of not having the proper hormonal function happening within our bodies and pushing that axis, that HPA axis, off in our hypothalamus, our pituitary gland. And so that for me was like, at the time, the period was just indicative. If I could get my period back, it would be an indicator to me that those other things were in place the way they needed to be to start healing the other symptoms that I was having. Loss of period is just a symptom.
I get a lot of people who are having a lot more symptoms, and most people have a lot more symptoms than you just said. Like, for example, nightly peeing, frequent nightly peeing. And also, very bad sleep, very brittle nails, very dry skin, very dry hair, frizzy hair, and being cold, feeling depressed, feeling anxious, feeling stressed. Then what a lot of people don't realize also is heart health, because we're exercising, we're doing the right thing, we're just being healthy, right? And having no idea that, when our hormones are out of whack, our heart is not protected. And it's a muscle. And it's our bodies, it's eating away its own muscles, basically, because we're not having enough. Our stores are empty inside. So we don't even realize that we're putting our heart in danger as well. I just wanted to add that.
I'm glad that you did, because I did have a lot of those other symptoms as well. Certainly my hair. This was just, I would say about a year and a half ago, my hairdresser was like, it's like you finally got your whole new head of hair. Because for so long, when I was a disordered eater and overexerciser and my hormones were obviously affected by that, I had the hair that was not strong, that was not healthy, that was more brittle, the nails, and I had night sweats that led to insomnia too. So it was certainly one of the worst seasons of my life. And this, I love my period now. When people complain, I sometimes am just like, try losing it for 2 years and then tell me that you're sad you have it. I definitely have this love affair now with my menstrual cycle, because having lost it, you kind of don't know what you've got till it's gone. And that was my experience for sure.
What made you want to recover?
Well, all of those symptoms that I listed, I felt so unlike myself. I felt very disconnected from my family. I felt also frustrated because, like we've talked about already, there comes a point when you can diet as much as you want and you can exercise as much as you want, and it's just not going to give you the results that you think you should have or you think are best, or all the diet gurus and fitness personalities are telling you is the result. You can do everything quote unquote right, and I say that in terms of diet culture, and still not get the results that they say spit out at the end of playing this game. It just doesn't happen. And so I got frustrated and tired. I remember a moment crying on my bed to my husband before we went somewhere, and I had convinced myself I needed to run a half marathon before going to somebody's picnic, just because that's what I decided I needed to do that day. And I was so exhausted and so in pain and just tired of feeling the weight of always having to measure and count and understand my food and restrict it and deprive myself, on top of pushing myself harder and further and spending more and more time trying to create this body and this life, of course, that wasn't happening. And I was just at the point of obsession. I remember crying to him, like, I cannot do this anymore. And he was like, okay, then just don't. Just don't. And that was something I could cling on to for about a week, but then I'd be right back in the throes of diet mentality and restriction and binging. Binging became a really big pendulum swing to the constant restriction and overexercise. As I would binge to the point of feeling so physically ill that I couldn't stand up, that I remember having to crawl into my car and calling my children's preschool, driving up to the side and being like, I know I'm supposed to come in to get them, but I'm really sick today. Please carry them out to the car. I didn't say I binged my brains out for 48 hours straight and now I'm not sure if my stomach's actually going to explode. I didn't say that. I just said I'm really sick, of course, because we try to keep all these things under wraps when we're in the throes of our binge eating. That part of it's shameful, right? We'll brag about diets all day, but as soon as the pendulum swings and we're binging, it's something that we keep very quiet. And so I had all of those experiences and it was exhausting and I couldn't do it anymore. So certainly once the pendulum swung to binge eating, certainly once I was feeling so physically ill, so mentally sick and tired, and really realizing I couldn't do this, that this was actually an impossibility for me to diet and exercise my way to the control of life that I wanted, to the type of life that I wanted, to the healing of my daughter and my husband that I wanted, and the fixing of myself, perfecting of myself that I wanted. I was desperate for help. And I did try every means possible, blog posts and websites. And I even called the eating disorder hotline a few times in my local area. Wasn't much help, which was so unfortunate. And I still recommend that people who do have an eating disorder call it and hope for the best in their own area. But for me, it just was not helpful at all. And I continued to wrestle with disordered eating while trying to heal myself and fix myself with any resources I could get my hands on. Podcasts like this one, like I said, blog posts, Facebook groups. I tried very hard to do it silently and without reaching out to a community and sharing my story and without opening up. But it did take me getting so desperate and so ready for change and healing and freedom that I found a coach that I really connected with and began to work with her. And that's when everything shifted for me.
Wow, I'm glad you found someone to work with, because that's not something that seems to be available here. And all the advice you hear from people, to combat binges is distract yourself, meditate, take a bath. I tried it all, It's just the same as with how not to be hungry. Like, go exercise, go brush your teeth, stuff like that. I did it all. I never connected the dots that the binges were not the problem. The problem was the restriction leading to this reactionary eating, which was actually my body fighting for me. Never once did anyone tell me. It was just like, this shameful thing has to stop. So of course I taught myself to restrict the day after the binge, and I got compliments for that. And I did that for 15 years. And the binges got worse and the overexercise got worse. And of course I was reinforcing the restriction the day after, because that was the only way I knew how to control or have a certain amount of control over this whole chaos. And I'm so defective. Something's terribly wrong with me. And no one ever put two and two together. And I can, thank the heavens that I am capable of speaking English, because that's how I discovered podcasts and heard people talk about this. To this day, I don't find information on this in German. It's only restrict, cut your calories, be more strict, blah, blah, blah. And that's terrible. Even the book Intuitive Eating in German is translated into losing weight intuitively. So I don't know what the hell is wrong here, but it is a lot. So Did you connect the dots, or did you have resources that connected the dots of your binges to you restricting and overexercising, or did you only find that out with your coach?
I had read a lot about binges, and I had certainly read advice that was like, oh, if you're binging, try allowing the foods and try. I did stumble upon some really great anti-diet, body positive resources that were sending the message, but it was one I didn't want to hear, because I was certainly at that point where, where you think binging is the problem and not dieting, where
Exactly.
you're certain that eating is your obsession and not restricting. And so I was at the place where I'm like, oh yeah, right. Like, allow all the foods. Well, then I'm going to eat all the foods forever, indefinitely. And I know what that feels like. I feel sick. Not only the fact that I certainly had a large amount of internalized fat phobia, which it was crazy because, again, like, I'd always been taught that whole it takes every kind of people to make the world go round. I distinctly remember knowing that it wasn't okay and it wasn't kind to talk about other people's bodies. And yet I was still personally afraid of being fat.
And I got
know
a question. Did you become more fearful of gaining the weight the skinnier you got? Because I think from reading other people's experience, the more we get into this energy deficit seeking state, like I got to exercise it off and eat less than I use and stuff like that, just losing weight. The further down we get, I mean, at my sickest, I was the most afraid of gaining weight. And I'm still afraid of gaining weight. And I know I still have to gain weight. And I'm totally not seeing how this is related to my personality, because I'm not vain. I'm not judging others. I love soft women. It's like something I have gotten myself into by becoming skinny.
Yeah.
I wonder
think a lot
if that
of it
happened to you too.
It did. It most certainly did. The smaller I got, I had the 6-pack abs. Like, all my life, I've had a butt, a booty, and I lost that. And I was so chiseled and muscular and frail too. And I just thought, like, oh, well, since I can get this way, this is the way I should be. That's the switch that was flipped, was like, since this is possible,
right,
it must be preferable. And so then I scrambled to stay there. Like, well, if it's possible for me, Lou Uhrich, to have 6-pack abs, then I must always have 6-pack abs. Also, what happens when I lose the 6-pack abs? What are my friends who I sent selfies of my 6-pack to? I'm so embarrassed embarrassed that I did that now, right? Like, again, I don't know what happened when diet mentality takes over. Suddenly the things I could care less about become like, hey, friend, check out my 6-pack. Like, no, I can't believe I still to this day. I'm like, I can't believe I sent her that.
And that's so not you. The way I experience you and your voice in the community, it's like, so not Lou.
It's not me at all, but I became obsessed. And again, once I found that I could reach that place, I thought I must stay there. And I noticed that with all of my clients everywhere along the weight spectrum. If they realize that they can lose 10 pounds, they think that 10 pounds is preferable. It doesn't matter what size they are. If they think that they can lose 10 pounds, they think it's preferable. If they think that they can chisel away their body fat percentage, they think that it's preferable. And on top of that, there's certainly the fear of what people will think, what people will say, maybe not to you, but under their breath or amongst each other, about the fact that, like, oh, she used to have a 6-pack. Well, she used to be 10 pounds lighter.
Totally.
So I think that really begins to take over too.
Like, oh, she let herself go. It was a matter of time. I have those dark thoughts about what will people think. Like, oh, look, after all these years, she's not a success after all. So with your coach, how did she get you to a point where you were able to soften around the idea of gaining weight, or how did that process look like? Because I often think, like, people, once they get the idea, they just gain the weight back. No big deal.
No.
And for me, that's just not the case. And I hate that process. Like, why can I not get my head around this faster? Why don't I just eat and rest? The advice is everywhere. Why am I making such a big deal out of it? But what I hear is that it often takes quite a while to undo the diet culture and diet mentality damage.
Yeah. And before I even get to that answer, I want to speak to what we were just talking about the fear of what other people, are going to think if we were smaller, we dieted down, or we got a more chiseled body and then we change. This permeates through all of the work that I do, through certainly my own personal experience, and likely yours too, is at the end of the day, Our society has created an understanding of fatness, of fat people, and what it means about them that they're fat. And that's more what we're afraid of, right? Like fat is fat, but we're more afraid of what it says about us to be fat or to gain that 10 pounds or to lose, the six pack. Because in our culture, so often fat means lazy. It means unmotivated. It means all of these horrible things that, first of all, it's not, but that our culture has created the stigma around and these messages so often we hear and we see. It means, uncontrollable. It means just ravenous and sensual even. It means being taken over by the senses and by desire. And there are things that we are afraid of. So I do want to say that is part of also what makes it hard.
Yeah, and we're afraid of women's desires.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And the last thing we want is people to think that we're lazy or we're this or we're that. And it really doesn't mean any of that, but we've been taught, we've been indoctrinated that it does. And so, of course, that's a part of it. And for me, working with my coach, I think first and foremost, just the fact of having a coach, because again, I said, I tried to do all of this on my own. I'm a very independent person. Certainly at that time, I didn't like showing all of my cards and putting everything out there. I didn't want other people to be involved or knowledgeable of what I was going through and my insecurities and what I felt like were my failings as a person. And I tried very hard to hold this closely, to maybe have the conversations or send an email or read a blog or follow somebody on social media and try to glean from them. But until I actually was in partnership with someone, a human, a coach, it wasn't until that point that things really shifted for me. I did not see her in person. She does her coaching the way that I do mine, which is most often via phone or Skype.
It's so hard to come across people in real life that would, say, hey, let's go on this journey together. I've not found anyone. So how did she soften you in that sense?
Having a person who was fully available and non-judgmental and willing to listen, but also with the wisdom of her own lived experience and her own studies was so useful to me, because there was nothing I was saying that was foreign to her. Just like you and I are sitting here talking right now and we're like, yeah, that, I remember that. Of course, yeah. And then you feel this way. That's kind of the experience I had with her. On top of it, it wasn't just the, commiserating on our experience. It was also, she asked questions and she inspired me or asked things of me, asked me to consider changing this behavior or consider questioning this mindset, and helped me to give myself permission to do the things I wanted to do, to be the person I wanted to be, instead of waiting on having the perfect body before I went and did it. It's something that I realize with my clients so often too, is that I think with a coach, what's so powerful, and certainly I can say this of my own coach, and I know I can say it of my work as well, is I become that voice for my clients that eventually they will take on themselves. But in the meantime, I get to stand in and be that person who says, it's okay, who offers the compassion where eventually they will cultivate their own self-compassion. But I get to be the person who offers that compassion, that willingness to dig deeper, that curiosity, the understanding, and then offers bits of wisdom and bits of my own experience and the experience of the many women that I've worked with and beyond who have all gone through this, to realize that it's a collective issue, not just a personal one. I'm a major nerd, so something that really helps with me. I love understanding how the body works, why it works that way. I like anthropology and biology are really exciting to me. So for me, having those little facts and those understandings is something that helped. And I wouldn't say necessarily that my coach did everything for me, but she pointed me in the directions where I could begin to feel empowered and begin doing the work of healing myself. And that was really important. So, of course, one tangent I really went off on was understanding the body, understanding why it turned my period off and my other hormones, why it was no longer responding the way it once had to a diet. Like understanding all of that, understanding what stress and the stress of dieting and body shame was doing to myself, both mentally and physically, was really interesting to me. And it helped me to connect and grow in relationship to my body in a way that changed everything.
And at what point did you realize, okay, I'm going to have to gain weight, and that's okay?
I'm a pretty much like all in sort of person. So it was very soon after I started working with a coach that I was like, I've exhausted every other option here. Like, fine, if somebody is telling me that in order to be free from this obsession and free from the shame and self-loathing that I currently existing in, I have to just allow myself to eat the food. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to try it. I kind of just went all in. And I also got a lot of information too, again, not just from my coach, but I read books like Overcoming Overeating and Intuitive Eating and other resources that were saying the same thing. And that helped to propel me and encourage me and support me while I stepped out in what was really hard, which was allowing all the foods and eating what I was actually really hungry for and letting my body shift and change accordingly.
What a lot of women express is that exercise is really the last hurdle that they can't seem to take, because as soon as they allow themselves to eat a little more freely, then they crank up the exercise. And when they try and reduce the exercise, then they limit their food again. You know, it all circles back to the fear of weight gain, I suppose. What is your advice for someone who is not having their period, who's afraid of gaining weight, who might be at a normal BMI, quote unquote? What would you tell them in regards to exercise?
The advice I always give to my clients that are currently suffering with hypothalamic amenorrhea is threefold. It's eat more, move slower, or not at all. That one is dependent on the particular person and her particular relationship and experience with movement. So someone who was previously working out a ton, who really truly enjoys and values nature and would feel comfortable getting out and taking some walks, great. But if that person is going to be calculating how far they went and how many calories that was, and so I actually have to walk 20 miles in order to burn off this donut, like, you know, if that's what's happening, we're just going to stop moving for a while. It depends where the relationship is with movement and exercise, where I specifically tell my clients to go here, but it's certainly move slower, and then that may be altered to less, or it may be altered to not at all for a period of time. And then additionally, finding the joy. So finding the joy in your life, finding your passions, finding what does actually make you feel good in terms of movement, and going where that is, what actually makes you excited to eat, and going there, who you actually feel drawn to spend time with and being with them. You know, that joy is a de-stressor, and having less stress and being less in our heads about getting our periods back, but certainly about exercise and food, is very much a healing component.
And for a lot of people, it really is a totally compulsive component of the whole house of disordered eating and the whole issue. So I don't know, for me, when I cut out the high intensity exercise last year, I started to realize that my walks became totally compulsive, and I suddenly walked for hours and was internally tracking again and hoping that, you know, I could justify my binges, or that I would have to eat less unless I took those walks. And all the insidious, you know, low-level movement started to creep in. Once more up and down the stairs and taking the long way home, and all with the mindset of I have to burn some more calories. So there was never a joyful component in, let's take the stair another time, because I never really took the elevator at all. And, I've lived here for 10 years. So what the hell? And seems to be the case for a lot of people that it is really hard to let that go. And I still battle with this totally. So I wonder, would you probably tell me to just let it all go for a while and not reduce the calories on top of that?
What I would tell you to do probably is, continue to eat more. And then given what you've just shared with me, I would say, I want you to take, this is always work I do with my clients. So they need to feel a little bit of discomfort, but enough to follow through, right? So maybe it's 4 weeks off of deliberate, intentional exercise entirely, for no other reason but to prove that at the end of time, you will still live. You will still be here. You'll still have your community. You'll still have all of the things. You just won't have exercised. Like, that is what I like for my clients to learn through taking time off when need be. It's because once you do it and you realize that you live through it and none of these horrible fears that we had, even the subconscious ones we don't know of, when we realize that these things don't happen, it's much easier then to maybe slowly add movement back in a way that really truly is, again, that more joyful, more desirable movement for you. And you might not know what that is. So on top of saying like, yeah, take 4 weeks off and realize that you live and get curious around how you feel and the fears that come up, but also the joys that come up or the changes you feel in the way that your body moves and functions. Because for a lot of people, they'll find they feel a lot better after having taken a break. And then the next part is to get curious about what kind of movement really brings you alive. Maybe it's dancing or Pilates. Maybe it's hiking. Maybe it
hula
is
hooping.
Yeah, hula hooping, swimming, weight training, who knows? But until we give ourselves the freedom to take it all off the table and then taste test a bunch of different types of exercise, we don't actually know what we enjoy.
Yeah.
So certainly for myself, even personally, a part of my recovery was committing that every quarter of the year, every 3 months, I was going to try something new until I found what my body and my mind and my heart really connected with in terms of movement. And so, but I would try new things. And I discovered that I really love hip hop dancing. And I created these new friends in this hip hop class that I've been going to now. And it's something that I so enjoy. And I would say I definitely was recovered at the time that I even stepped foot in that class, but it was still a part of my discovery process of never letting that curiosity go of what does my body really connect with? What do I really enjoy? How do I really want to move? And once I found it, I never stopped going. And my husband even comes with me now to hip hop class. But it was definitely an adventure to learn, but I never would have given myself that opportunity. And I don't know how many calories I burn. I refuse to ever own a Fitbit or count a single thing ever again. And so I have no concept of what it's doing in terms of body mass for me, but I know what it's doing for me intrinsically. And I so love it that I'll never go back. But again, at the time when I was so self-involved and obsessed with understanding, like, okay, like this exercise burns this, or it works this particular muscle. And so once I could move past that, then I really could find what I loved and enjoyed. And I have so much fun and so much peace about doing it.
I think a lot of people need to break the addiction. And from what I heard from an interview I had last week was that when she went cold turkey for 3 weeks, the urges, and the anxiety she had and the guilt she felt and the unrest and the guilt about eating still the same amount that she did when she ran a half marathon a day, basically, that subsided after 3 weeks. And that wouldn't have happened. So what you said in the beginning, like breaking that spell and actually seeing the world will keep on turning. And it's about a liberating act, like breaking an addiction that has power over you. You can only take your power back by proving to yourself, this is no thing that should be dictating my day. I am in control. And in order to regain control, we have to really let go. It really made sense the way she described it. And she said that it was also important to not reduce the calories just because she was inclined to do so, of course. Like, hey, I'm not moving that much. I can't eat like that. And then she had to get that under control too and then eat just as much, And in eating disorder recovery circles, it's also strongly advised to really give up exercise because it's often a component of the eating disorder. And a lot of athletes have disordered eating and eating disorders. And, they're just not being detected or they don't seek help because, in the athletes' world, who cares if you're not having a period? It's even worn as a badge of honor, I heard.
Well, I always tell my clients this, which I think is really important to what we're talking about, which is that anytime they hear that voice of should in their head, like, oh, I should minimize calories because I didn't work out today, or I should run an extra lap because I had that glass of wine, or I should get up off this couch right now, or anytime they hear that should, no matter what it's about, I ask them to give it the middle finger. And by that, I mean, do the opposite. if you hear that voice say, oh, I should minimize calories because I didn't exercise, like just go eat an extra cookie. Like if you hear the voice say, I should run an extra lap because I had that glass of wine, actually run one less lap or don't run at all. Like I challenge them to kind of spit in the face of those shoulds because, again, it's the same theory. But once we do that, we realize it's not linear. It's not this equal equation. It's not calories in, calories out, or having to follow these very clear-cut rules in order to feel safe and whole and fabulous and free in your body. It's not. And so the only way we know that is if we challenge those shoulds, if we challenge those subconscious underlying rules we have about what it means to exist in our bodies and what it means to eat and move and live. And so I often will say, like, give it the middle finger. If you hear the should, this is a chance, an opportunity for you to uproot that stronghold in your life, that thing that's taking over your mind, that thing that's telling you how you should be instead of letting you be how you are. And so it's frustrating and it's hard sometimes to be like, oh, yes, I hear that should, so I'm going to double down the other way and do something that I think I shouldn't do. But it's also very freeing and healing.
It's a DBT skill, right? Do the opposite action. Mm-hmm. And I also wonder, I mean, for me, I didn't realize it, but when the weight started to come on, at one point I relapsed. I just, my old habits started to creep back in, and I sort of was okay with it because it felt safer. So I wasn't really self-aware enough to realize that was actually, me relapsing or me giving up on recovery. And I want to know how you carry your clients through when the bodily changes actually come.
So when the bodily changes actually come, it's a lot about getting curious with ourselves and compassionate with ourselves. I think self-compassion, as taught by and developed by Dr. Kristen Neff, is a really, really powerful tool towards being able to be with ourselves during times of change. And then also curiosity is just always so helpful. Well, what am I really afraid will happen? So like my body's changing and I need to go up a size in clothes. So what am I really worried about? I'm worried about other people noticing. Okay, so why am I worried about other people noticing? I'll have them kind of follow that trail of like asking the questions. Well, what is this really saying? Or what am I really fearing? Because it's never just like, well, I'm scared I'm going to gain weight, or I'm scared my body's going to change. There's always something more behind it, underneath it. And so I'll have them get curious and dig through those feelings and thoughts, and then we'll question it and we'll observe it and we'll be like, is this really true? Are we sure? Where can we look at and inspect in life to see, like, maybe this isn't exactly what I thought, or maybe this isn't the way I've always known it. For instance, my clients who have to change clothing sizes, I'll so often just be like, okay, I totally get it because I was there once too. And one of the things that was really helpful for me is as my body changed sizes, I joined a clothing company, where they mail order you some outfits every month. And I joined that for a short interim time while my body was changing so that I always had some new clothes that were stylish and were mailed to my house where I could try them on in the comfort of my own home and just ship back anything that I didn't want without going to a person at a counter or being out, in the stores at the mall. And I employed that as a way to kind of help me through the process of wearing clothes I actually felt great in, that fit my body, that fit my style, instead of trying to squeeze myself into clothes that weren't fitting. Because anytime something is, what did I read the other day? It was so good. It was in a book that had nothing to do with body image, but it was something along the lines of just like anything that doesn't fit, it pinched and it prodded and it wore me down. And I feel like that's what happens with clothing that no longer fits us, is it'll pinch and it'll prod, and it's this constant reminder that
we keep it for the exact purpose of reminding us where we should be.
Right. So definitely I always encourage, like, you've got to continue to cultivate your style and your comfort and your personality in what you wear, because that's a constant reminder and frustration as our bodies change. But also I'd always bring into question, like, so just tell me, if you went into a shoe store and usually you wear a size 8, but you couldn't fit into it and you had to wear a size 9, would you be so upset? Would you have an emotional attachment to the size 8 shoe? And most of my clients that I talk to are like, no, of course not. I just get the 9 and move on. Like, who cares? But we don't feel that same way about clothes. Why? So this is when I also begin working with my clients about getting critical about the messages we're being sent what they mean, and if it's actual reality. Like, critical thinking is something I value so much and something I try to continue to nurture in myself, in my children, and certainly in my clients as well. So let's get critical around the fact that we just acknowledge that we could step into a shoe store and have to go up a size in shoes and shrug our shoulders, buy the shoes, move on. But if we stepped into a jean store and had to go up a size in pants, we might not even buy them. We might walk out crying. Why? Well, because the culture has said something about our worth, about our livelihood, about our futures, about our potentials for happiness and success based on our clothing size that they haven't inundated us with based on our shoe size.
Yes,
Why?
and they told us to conflate the idea of thin equals healthy. So
Right.
a lot of people go into the immediate panic of, but I want to be healthy.
Right. And so again, that's where critical thinking comes in. And again, it helps that I'm a big science geek, and I love looking at studies and reading articles and understanding the way the body works, and a huge fan of health at every size and body respect, and knowing that it's not so simple as media and marketing has made it to be. Health has become propaganda for the diet industry and the fitness industry to continue to make money. And it's on the back.
Profitable, yeah.
Yeah, and it's mainly on the backs of women.
Completely on the backs of women and profiting off our insecurities and, increasingly on men's too, one has to say.
Right.
And I've got a question about binges because you are specializing in helping people overcome binge eating. And I know for a lot of women who are in recovery from an eating disorder and also from amenorrhea, eating a lot of food and experiencing extreme hunger. And, just like with the Minnesota starvation experiment, where all of a sudden when they were free to eat again, they ate up to 10,000 calories a day until the urges subsided. But no one told them to restrict and go on a diet. So they just observed those men eating extreme amounts of food until their weight was happy again. And so for a lot of people in active recovery, they are experiencing those binges and extreme hunger, and that's normal and necessary for the body to heal. Yet there are those other binges or, the reactionary eating that happens for people who are holding on to diet mentality or who are on some sort of elimination diet or, quote, lifestyle change. So they experience the binges as some sort of falling off the wagon type binge eating that they can control and often hate themselves for. And that's where you come in, right? You are specialized in helping those sorts of binges because the other binges are not binges we should even interrupt. So I don't even know how to put them apart.
Well, absolutely. I think recovery eating, for people with eating disorders, there's recovery eating. You're eating a large amount of foods, usually high caloric foods, as a way for your body healing. They're different, but they're not, because the binge eating that my clients experience as a result of deprivation, restriction, dieting is also recovery eating. But
right, that's what I thought.
Yes, they're both recovery eating. And when I help women stop binge eating, I don't do it by having them, I know Isabel Fox and Duke says, but like sitting on their hands, or tying themselves down, right? That is not what I'm about. At the end of the day, we need to accept our eating in order to heal our eating. And so in some ways it is the same. But for people who have yo-yo dieted, for people who have been restricting and depriving themselves, who then struggle on the other end with extreme binges that are painful and frustrating, and you feel like you are out of control, you feel rabid and afraid, there certainly is help to be had there in eliminating the binges, but it's not in forcing them away. And it's not in these like behavioral modifications to stop the binges. In the beginning of our talk today, I think you brought up just drink some water or go for a walk, or, these ideas that people say like, oh, if you want to stop binging, like do these things instead. And that's not the case. That's not how my clients overcome binge eating. They first overcome binge eating by understanding why they're binging. And it's a very kind and loving and healthy response of the body to restriction and deprivation, which is why I say in some senses it's the same as what happens after someone with a clinical eating disorder is recovering. Most certainly, they might have a more extended period of time where they're refeeding at amounts that seem really extreme to them, but for their body is exactly what they need to heal and recover and get all of the nutrients and store up all of the things that it needs to function normally again. And so with binges that happen for people who are yo-yo dieters or who constantly restrict or quote unquote clean eaters or people who are following some sort of plan or eliminating certain foods, they can have that same feeling of intense compulsory eating where they just feel like they can't stop. They're standing at the refrigerator door with it open, just devouring everything they can with their bare hands. And it's a really normal, healthy response of the body to deprivation. So of course, the first thing we do to overcome binge eating is to stop depriving and to allow all the foods. I think that that's really important. So allowing everything and anything at any time and in any quantity, because we can say, oh, I'll allow the chocolate cake, but only one slice and only at lunch, not after dinner late at night. We can still have these rules, and that's not going to help you overcome binging entirely. So it's letting go of all the rules, abandoning all of the things we thought we should do or had to do in terms of eating, allowing all of the foods, and working on body acceptance. That's a part of recovering from binge eating as well. And then again, getting curious. When we binge, it's not about stopping the binge. It's about being present for the binge. So I never ask my clients or even advise them, this is how you stop mid-binge. Get a box together of lots of fun tasks you can do. Take out your adult coloring book and start coloring when you really want to eat the brownies. No.
Chew 100 times before you swallow. Fuck you.
No. Right. No, I'm telling them, go get the brownies, get your favorite brownies, make them warm. If you want ice cream, get the ice cream too. But then sit down and actually let yourself eat this in a state of peace. So sit down. Build the atmosphere. Don't be distracted. Don't be ashamed while you're eating this brownie or these brownies or this pan of brownies, if that's what it is. Just let yourself fully embrace the experience. Taste everything. Pay attention. Be present for the binge, because I will tell you, the more that we can be present with our binges, the more we can actually notice when we are satisfied, first of all, and actually notice that it's okay to allow ourselves to have these things that we want. But it allows us too to be curious about why do I feel so what is it about this brownie that's compelling me? Is it that I went to 3 parties this last week and refused to eat dessert at any one, even though I really wanted that chocolate cake? Because I thought that I needed to be smaller or eat less. And so here I am on Saturday downing this pan of brownies. It gives you time too, when you're sitting down and you're present, to kind of do an inventory on why this experience is happening. And also stay in touch with your body, because at one point it's not loving for our bodies to binge in the sense of binging to the point of being uncomfortable, binging in a state of stress and panic, being frustrated and urgent about it can be really harmful to our body. We can feel, like I already said in this podcast, I've definitely been to the place of crawling on my hands and knees sick from eating so much. And it's not kind. It's not loving to our bodies. So there's also a component of body acceptance and body relationship that needs to be at play if you really want to overcome binges, because it's so multifaceted. It's so nuanced, but it most certainly isn't the sitting on your hands, locking up the fridge, or not letting the food in the house sort of experience.
But did you become fearful when you started to give yourself permission? When you started to recognize how hungry you were maybe, or that the binges were still happening? What was the process like?
Absolutely. We all become fearful, and we all also have to grieve. We all also have to grieve the idea of weight loss. We have to grieve the idea of having this, the body ideal that we have in our minds, this image of ourselves that we want. We have to grieve that. We have to grieve the idea of being able to control so meticulously our food. And we have to grieve the notion that health, longevity, eternal life is at the other end of us getting our diets right or getting our eating under control, because none of that's true, but it's a lot of what plays into, we want to live forever. Most humans are afraid of death. And so a lot of this dieting and trying to eat quote unquote right has to do with that, with this idea of health. And so we have to grieve all of these ideas and we have to face all of them. And of course, it's scary to go into those situations, but it's one of those things, like so many things, that you just don't know until you go for it. And what you find is the more you allow the binges, the less frequently they show up. The more you're allowing all the food and you're not judging yourself and you're bringing compassion to the table with you when you stab your fork into that pan of brownies and you're bringing kindness and presence and mindfulness and understanding, the less frequent these binges become, because the more understanding and relationship you have with yourself, the more allowance you're giving to eat a brownie anytime, not just when you finally had enough of the restriction and the willpower runs out and you absolutely cannot live or move on unless you go and eat the thing. Like, that doesn't happen anymore, because that freedom to eat when you want, what you want, that freedom to take or pass on anything at any time becomes such a part of your life that you don't need these urgent moments with food anymore. They really just go away. But we don't know it until we begin to live it.
Wow.
So it's scary. It is scary. It's hard. But the only way out, it's like people have said this so many times, and it's the truth when it comes to binge eating. The only way out is through. The only way out is to destigmatize, take away the shame, be present, be aware in the binge, to let it happen and realize, again, just like giving up exercise, letting a binge happen. I always tell my clients, just take the next right step for you, eat the next right food for you. And when I say right, what I mean is what brings you nourishment and pleasure and joy and what you desire. So yeah, if you eat that pan of brownies, then tomorrow you don't just have orange juice and nothing else for the next 12 hours because you shouldn't, because you had brownies. No way. You do the next right thing for you, which is maybe you wake up and you have a stomach ache and you're feeling a little off, or you've had like that sugar hangover. Well, what kind of foods are soothing to you? What kind of movement, if any, is soothing to you? Do you need to call in late to work or go out and to get some fresh air? Do you need some really gentle, scary, carby foods that most people are like, no, I don't want to eat carbs after I've had brownies? Like, but maybe that's just what your body would feel up for processing, something that can go through the body quickly and be transferred into energy quickly because it's been through a lot if it's just had a binge. So I always tell my clients, like, just make the next right choice for you with food and be really present about it. We don't need to look back in shame or frustration. So we've had that experience. What's your next experience going to be like? Well, that all depends on how your body feels and what you're actually wanting in that moment. We can't base it on the past or plan for the future, because that's what people will do often too, is like, well, I'm going to go out to this really amazing restaurant tonight, and so I should eat nothing all day until I get there. But that just sets us up for frustration as well. So I always say, just make the next right step for you, next right food choice, next right movement choice, and take it one step at a time.
And not forget the body image work. You had a wonderful blog post on your website, loueats.com, where you wrote about being on the beach in your bikini, reflecting on past beach experiences with your husband, and that you remembered, those days when you had those painful thoughts like, do I look like her? Am I bigger or smaller? Do I have a back roll? Does she have less cellulite than me? I wonder what she eats. What does her workout look like? I should have run more before this vacation. How many days would I have to starve in order to get those abs? I bet she counts macros. Is she using supplements? Is she laughing at my thighs? I think I need to go low fat. Stuff like that. I loved this blog post, and I realized how many of my thoughts often are still, comparative. Like I'm comparing myself, or I feel insecure about, losing safety, losing face, losing my social currency, losing respect. All of those things come up when we recover, because that's who we are. We are deeply vulnerable human beings, and that's okay to realize that that's actually fine. And no skinny body is ever going to help us get away from that, because we still lose people. We still face horrible stuff in life, and it's still gonna rain, and we might still lose our job or lose a loved one, and it's nothing to do with our weight. So I just thought I had to mention this beautiful blog post. And
yeah, I love that you could relate to it. It's because it's so real. Like I was talking in that blog post about like this, sitting on the very same beach, in the very same bathing suit that years before I had had all of those thoughts in. I'm sitting there, I'm judging every other person that walks by and judging myself against them and wondering how I measure up and how I fit in, or if I don't, or what I need to do to get there. And yet, years go by and here I am. And I think the title of that blog post was "Your Story Isn't Over."
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And it really was just an encouragement to my readers to say, like, hey, I know you're somewhere in your story. It could be about food and body. It could be about your job. It could be about your relationship. It could be about anything. But I know you're somewhere in your story where you really think that, like, you'll never get out. There's no way through, and that you have to fix yourself or fix something in order to make it all go away. And it was just my encouragement that you don't, that you'll be reflecting years later and realize that life went on and things changed. And certainly I was active and intentional in my recovery, but I could be in that same bathing suit on that same beach with my toes in the same sand and have a totally different experience. And just hearing that that's possible and getting real, yes, about those very same thoughts that so many of us have or have had or are still having is so, I think, helpful and important to realize we're not alone. This is a collective issue. Even though we feel like all by ourselves, even though it feels like it's something we'll never be able to get through, there are so many people, and there's certainly a collective aspect to body image and body acceptance and recovery.
Completely.
That I think is worth acknowledging sometimes and just cheering each other on.
I think healing body image is a collective issue, really. And the world has its own eating disorder going on. And I think we need each other to heal also. Because, it takes a lot of bravery to accept ourselves as we are and not let anyone or anything pummel us into an ideal that we cannot measure up without going insane, quite literally. So I want to thank you for your work and what you do and your beautiful voice that you recently put out in a new podcast as well, which I always love when new voices are coming out, because I think we need more podcasts and more people speaking up and more, sane voices against diet culture and our own internalized diet mentality. So you have created this podcast called Untamed. So if someone is curious about your work and the podcast, would you tell them where to go and what your podcast is about?
Yeah, sure. So the podcast, I created it specifically and intentionally not to be focused on body image and disordered eating and dieting. People who are certainly talking about body justice, body liberation, and the things that you talk about so often and that are such a part of the body positive anti-diet community. Those are topics that are near and dear to me. It's obviously the work that I do in the world, and so they're a part of the show. But I created the show specifically for women to hear the voices of other women who are breaking barriers, shattering that glass ceiling, challenging stereotypes, going above and beyond expectations, and living their true work in the world. Because something that I've found can so often happen is, first, we're stuck in disordered eating and dieting, obsessing about our food and our bodies and exercise. Then, as we recover, we get into this beautiful community, this great space of body positivity and anti-diet. But what can happen for a lot of people is we can get stuck there. So first we've identified as dieters who are on this specific program, and we're doing this thing, and we're the fit person and we're the thin person, and we've begun to identify ourselves. Basically, food and body take over our lives. What can happen sometimes is when we shift to recovery, when we shift into this anti-diet space, into this body positive space, we can get stuck there too, where then that becomes our only community, where that becomes our identifier. And so in some ways, food and body are still controlling our lives and where we show up and how we show up. It's just in a different way, a way that I think is surely more healthy, a way that I think is surely more loving and compassionate. But I love for my clients, and I would hope for all women, that we move even beyond that. And so I thought I could create a podcast with amazing women doing all sorts of things, from professional ballerinas to women speaking about racial justice and economic justice and social justice. But I thought, wow, I could create a platform where we could hear from all different women in all different bodies and in all different races and all different ability levels to share their perspectives, their dreams, and how they're out there living and being themselves in the world, and being an untamed woman. And so that's kind of what I wanted to convey with my podcast. And for me and my work, it's so funny. We were bound to be together because my one-on-one coaching is called Unrestricted. And I'm Lou, and the abbreviation for your show always comes up as LU.
Yeah, it's incredible. I thought
meant
the
to
exact
be.
same.
But yeah, my one-on-one coaching program that I do with women is called Unrestricted, and you can find out about that at loueats.com. And I'm also launching a standalone self-paced program called the Binge Eating Breakup Plan.
Thank you for that. My last question to you is, what would you like to be remembered for?
I would like to be remembered for, I'd like to be remembered for being who I hope and aspire to be with my kids and my clients and with all humans, which is just a raging, raving fangirl of humanity. I want to be remembered for being somebody who is encouraging and supportive, a fighter for justice and liberation on all fronts, on all accounts, and somebody who is willing to always speak up and speak out for the people around me. And that doesn't mean people who are just like me, or only people in my family, or only my clients, or only people that I love, but for all of humanity. I want to be remembered for not being silent.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time. It's been a wonderful conversation.
I agree. Thanks for having me on the show.
This was today's dose of badassery from Life Unrestricted. Find the show notes with links to everything we mentioned in this episode over at lifeunrestricted.org. And if this show is making you feel good, awesome, make sure to subscribe and please let others feel good too. By leaving a 5-star review on iTunes, you'll help make this show more visible and therefore more accessible for others. You're the best. Thanks.